So we're going to start switching over here. We have Midge Grinstead, who is the Kansas State Director for the Humane Society of the United States. She's going to be talking about adoptions for feline leukemia-positive cats in Kansas. Midge has been in the animal welfare field for 25 years, including over 14 years as the Executive Director of Lawrence Humane Society and 10 years as the Kansas State Director for the Humane Society of the United States. Midge has worked in Kansas to support animal welfare legislation, fight animal cruelty in all forms, and engage citizens to promote the protection of all animals. She offers training for law enforcement, shelters, and county animal response teams. She helped to overturn or block breed-specific legislation in multiple counties and worked on the passage of the state's cockfighting legislation. She also co-founded Humane Kansas Legislative Network, a group that was instrumental in passing Kansas's felony animal cruelty bill into law, and served on the governor's board for companion animal legislation. Midge also helped the Kansas Animal Health Department in the seizure and housing of animals from hoarders, substandard kennels, and other situations involving animal welfare violations. She was instrumental in helping to form the Kansas State Animal Response Team, Douglas County Animal Response Team, Northeast Kansas Regional Response Team, the Pet Animal Coalition of Kansas, and Kansas Horse Education Advocacy Resource Team. Midge is currently a board member of the Kansas Animal Control Association. She's been married to Mark Grinstead for 34 years and has a son, stepdaughter, 9 grandchildren, and a wonderful puppy mill rescue dog named Cooper. All right, so Midge, I believe Kristen's going to hand the screen over to you.
Well, hello, everyone. I'm really excited to be here today. I have learned so much. My gosh, what incredible speakers. Just thrilled. I know who I'm going to call when this is over, Dr. Levy and Monica. I'm gonna definitely be calling them for information and help with what we need here. Let me see if I can move this to the other side. There we go. I'm going to start with some information about the disease law, another state's information on what they went through, and then kind of take you through the process of what happened in Kansas. And we seem to be very, very backward and very slow in changing anything. But I think walking through the progress or the process, I hope everyone has questions, and if you're having issues, you can look at what we did and either do it or not do it, depending on what we did. So the background on those disease laws, there were a lot of rules that people came up with to help reduce the risk of disease outbreaks, particularly with livestock. Those were the basis of most of those laws, and certainly in Kansas, that was why it was put into place. Companion animals around the United States often need veterinary health certificates or CVIs when moving from one state to another. And in Kansas, it's true coming in and going out. You have to have them. And the interesting thing about Kansas is it doesn't designate that you have to be a shelter or a rescue. So if I'm traveling with my dog and I'm coming back into the state, technically I have to have a CVI. So it's kind of really outdated and backward. Well, let's see, it's not advancing. So let's see if I can get it to advance. See if that had anything to do with it. Nope. Okay.
You tried the forward arrow on your keypad?
Yep. Well,
frozen.
You could also try the space bar. That work?
No. Ah, there we go. Okay. Yes. Okay, yeah. Thank you. So New Hampshire had a case where, due to an oversight, there was nothing that happened. There was no anti-adoption of FIV or FeLV positive cats. There was just an oversight in the law where it was removed in 2012. So they then had a prohibition on adoption and transfer of those positive cats. This was just the contagious disease section that included dogs, cats, and ferrets. And again, nothing happened. It just was left out. In 2015, they did a survey in New Hampshire, and they had several shelters, 85% of the shelters said that they had to euthanize those FIV positive or feline leukemia positive cats because they weren't allowed to move them into homes or to transfer them to other rescues or sanctuaries that specialized in them. And the sanctuaries were saying, look, we're housing them, but we'd rather have them in a home setting because they're very stressed here and we're having a hard time keeping them healthy. So it clearly wasn't working. And in 2017, they came up with a clarification in a budget bill, in the state budget bill. And there was nothing unusual about it. And oftentimes things are put into budget bills that really have nothing to do with the budget. But they're put in there. They do it all the time in Kansas. So it sparked a couple of things. First, they had great support from the Federation of Humane Organizations, their Department of Agriculture, and the Veterinary Medical Association. They were all in favor. The exemption that was included in the 2012 House budget also caused that bill to stall. And then the Senate in the 2017 version thought it should be a standalone bill. They didn't understand, why is this language in the budget bill when, if they want it to pass and they want this to happen, why isn't it just a bill that someone's bringing here? What that caused was hundreds of phone calls and emails to people's senators, and they clarified the issue to them as being really important and urgent. So the language was restored and included in the budget that year, and it was enacted into law. And I brought that up because staying connected is critical. And in Kansas, it's absolutely been a critical issue. Things are not always straightforward. So you have to be able to know where to look for those changes in laws that are going to affect animals and animal welfare. If you are not connected with legislature, or you don't have time to do that, then find someone who's embedded in that process. That is key to keeping up with situations like what happened in New Hampshire. If everybody could have jumped on it back then, back in 2012, maybe it wouldn't have happened. So you want to keep up on the issues. There's a lot of different types of notification systems. I use StateNet, and they just update me on anything. So when a bill is dropped into the House or the Senate, when it's getting a hearing, when it passes one of the houses, if it's signed by the governor, anytime it's moving or having anything going on, they will notify you. I even got notification that 2 of them were going into effect on July 1st. So it's a really good way to keep up. All you have to do is look, and if you're not interested, you just delete the email. So keeping up on issues is critical for you, and certainly going to be critical for Kansans in 2022. You need to know when to speak out. A lot of times we'll wait until the hearing, we'll make it known, and then everyone testifies, we have written testimony, we visit the entire committee afterwards, we send information to whatever house that the issue is in, and sometimes we jump on it right away because we don't want them to have a hearing. So know when to speak out, and that connects back to that embedded person in the legislative process. And then share the information. I have a Facebook page for HSUS, and everything there goes on to my personal page. And I forcibly make my family share it too. They're kind of sick of it, I'm sure, but they're great. They share it, they call their legislators, the ones in Kansas do, and so it works really well. Sharing information is key to getting things done. You can find your local legislator by going to openstates.org and it'll give you your federal and your local state legislators. You need to get to know them. A lot of you are the experts in your community. They should be coming to you when they have a bill like a feline leukemia or FeLV bill like we did in Kansas. They should have been coming to me. They should have been coming to their shelters or their rescues and asking them questions. So you need to get to know them and let them know that you're the expert in the animal field. How do they stand on your issues, and how are you going to convince them to take interest? I always ask them outright if they've heard about FeLV or FeLuke, and if they say no, I have a sheet that I hand them, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. And then I also have a story, and I think that's critical. Kind of shows why it's important to you, why it's important to the community, and ties it all together, and it makes it very personal. And connecting with your legislator on a personal level, I think is key to developing that cooperation and working environment together. And then I always ask, after I follow up, I do a follow-up with an email, and I'll send them additional information. And then I follow up again and ask them, are you going to help me change this? Are you going to sponsor a bill? Can I use the revisor under, and have you sign off on that? Whatever they can do, I want them to help me. They work for me, and so they need to help me help animals. The current Kansas law is 47-610 through 635. It's a disease law regarding mainly livestock, but in this section you can see they added dogs and cats. And basically it's saying you can't move them anywhere if they're contagious or infectious. It was designed to protect livestock. Kansas, like many Midwestern states, is billions and billions of dollars in industry with livestock, and they want to protect their industry. Kansas at the time was having huge issues with puppy mills, including Connie Chung coming here and, putting them on TV and showing how bad they were. They used to have Parade magazine and all the newspapers, and they did a story, front page, Kansas, and the whole magazine was about Kansas puppy mills. So at the time, they added cats and dogs, but it was mainly to stop those dogs and cats that were severely ill from crossing state lines and going into other states. The Animal Health Department, who regulated at the time shelters, rescues, breeding facilities, pet stores, boarding and training, research facilities, and brokers or in and out of state distributors. They oversaw all of that, and they averaged seizing 1,000 animals per year and closing down 20 to 45 licensed and unlicensed facilities per year. And this is all going to make sense in a minute. If you're a licensee, one of those people indicated there on the last slide, if you're a licensee, you are required to have a veterinarian of record. And that means a veterinarian that has, you're their client. It's not just you pick a veterinarian and they do stuff for you every once in a while. You're the client and you know each other, and they're responsible for making sure that you have set policies and procedures. They sign a document every year when the license is renewed to make sure that those policies and procedures are not only updated, but they're in place, and they particularly target ill, injured animals. What it did was allowed veterinarians autonomy in making decisions regarding those animals that were owned by the licensees. So shelters that had, I can give you an example. If we had a FeLV positive cat, we could talk to our vet and say, hey, we have somebody who wants to adopt this cat. Will you give it an examination? He would look it over, have a conversation with the person who wanted to adopt, and then ask if that person wanted their veterinarian to look. If they did, we would deliver the cat to their veterinarian, and he would give the thumbs up, he or she would give the thumbs up, and then the cat would be adopted. But the bottom line was the veterinarian had autonomy to make those decisions for their licensees, unless there was a quarantine order in place, which is what that disease law talks about. We did notify the animal health department anytime we did transferring or adoption of a diseased animal, and the whole process. And then all of those records were also kept with those animals. I never had them tell me no. So in 2010, Governor Sam Brownback was elected in Kansas, and he immediately issued an emergency reorder and abolished the Kansas Animal Health Department. He removed the director, who was an attorney who had been the director for 18 years. The Pet Animal Act was then moved under the Kansas Department of Agriculture. They sold off all the kennels, trucks, and other equipment used for seizure, and they stopped any movement of ill cats and dogs into foster homes. They no longer allowed the veterinarians of record for shelters and rescues to make those decisions on ill and injured animals, or ill animals, not injured. And they took a particular stand against adoption or transfer of FIV positive and feline leukemia positive cats. You were to hold them for their life or euthanized. What that did was created most shelters, most of the larger shelters just stopped testing for those two things. Oh. Anyway, I'm not going to go backwards. I'm not sure I can. There we go. So it caused the advocates to just unite all across the state and use their voices and pretty much get enraged. We targeted the most populous counties. Like most states, you have more legislators in those counties. So we focused on them, the committee chairs and leadership. So the head of the Senate, the head of the House. We then came together in different sections of the state and had grassroots meetings. I met individually with shelters and rescues, and we went over everything, including messaging. And messaging with whatever you do is key. You've heard a lot of stuff today about the feline leukemia positive cats. And the best thing, I know what I'm going to do is I'm going to come up with a paper that I can hand out, a little fact sheet. And I'm going to have two different kinds. I'm going to have one for legislators that basically has a headline, and then maybe 3 bullet points, something that's very easy for them to look at and to get answers on. For the advocates and the shelters and rescues, I will have one that has more information. So it'll have the same headline, the same bullet points, but more information under the bullet points in case their legislators have additional questions. I think it's critical anytime you're working on any issue that your message is the same across the board. It gets confusing if you don't have the same messaging, not only for the advocates, but for the legislators. I've had them ask me, why would you want to do this? And I'm like, that's not what we want to adopt those cats out, not make people euthanize them. Oh, you know, so you have to really work with them to make sure that they understand the message and that you expand on that message so they can answer questions if their legislator has them. We do letters to the editor, and then I like to do follow-up. So when I see a letter to the editor in the paper, you'll see it'll go back and forth. Some people are for it, some people are against it. What I like to do is have the letter to the editor in there, and then I want specific people to make comments. That shelter director or the shelter board president or someone from the rescue, someone from the Animal Control Association, you know, someone from that community in those areas needs to make a comment, because there are people that will go, oh, I get it. And so you're not just sending a letter to the editor, you're educating your community, the ones that are reading that and looking at those comments. Sounds silly, but it's really a very easy way to do some education. And with op-eds, you want to do the same thing, to have follow-up. Social media can be good and bad. It certainly was for us during our FIV issue. We really wanted it to pass. We had a bill and we wanted it to pass. And we had a lot of negative comments from some shelters and rescues. And instead of some of the other shelters and rescues putting down, well, here's a link for information and leaving it at that, it got into a, oh yeah, well, I'm right, you're wrong. And that doesn't help anybody. It gets off track. People focus on that instead of on the issue, and really there's no education. So if you can post the same post, everybody's got the same post, just like the specialized messaging, and then you have links when somebody disagrees, just say, well, you can look here, here's the information. And if they continue to agree, to just say thank you for your information or thank you for your comment, and move on. Very few, I think in the 10 years I've worked for HSUS, I have deleted one and blocked one person because they were just being rude. So it wasn't because of their comment, it was because of being rude. So social media is good and bad. Make sure you follow your messaging. I also attended every governor's pet animal board meeting. They give you 2 minutes at the end to give your comments on everything they've talked about. And I always brought up the FIV positive cats. They wouldn't listen about the FeLV positive cats, so I didn't talk about that. But I made sure I was on the record for every visit talking about that issue, because sooner or later they were going to get sick of me going there and they were going to do something about it, which actually happened. The representative for the shelters and rescues that was on the board got the Department of Ag to agree to send out a poll to veterinarians about adoption. Do you think FIV cats should be allowed to be adopted, or should we require euthanization? And they worded it, it was kind of tricky. It was talking about, because they're diseased, should they be euthanized? So I was worried at first, but 79% of the vets that were polled agreed that those cats should be allowed to be adopted or transferred. We included FIV adoption and transfer in several bills. One of them passed the House 119 to 6, or yeah, 119 to 6, and went to the Senate, passed the Senate 38 to 2, no problem. It came back. It was a bill that updated the Pet Animal Act, but when it was in the Senate, they clarified some wording. So there was some improper grammar and a misspelling. So they clarified that, which means any changes in any of the bills from either house that goes to another house has to be sent to a conference committee. The conference committee is always the chair and the vice chair of, for this one, is always the chair and the vice chair of the Ag Committee, for the Senate and the House, and then the 2 minority leaders for each house. And Sharon Schwartz was the head of the House. She was adamantly opposed to this FIV adoption and transfer that was in there, and she removed it. So I was irate, but you know, it was 4-2. The 2 minority voted against doing that, and the 4 went with what Sharon had said. So I went out to my car and cried for about an hour. I went home. We had a team meeting and decided the best way to handle it was to send an email to the entire House and put a lot of thought into the subject line. And when we finally sent it, it said Schwartz goes against the will of the House. And then you opened it up and there was a 1 line about what she did. Talk about creating fury. They were angry. I mean, it was an overwhelming vote, but because it would then have to go back to the Senate, if they made the change, they'd have to go back to the Senate and conference committee. They decided to leave it out and put it in regulations. So about 2 weeks later, the Department of Agriculture Animal Health director sent out a notice that the cats could be adopted or transferred. And it basically says exactly what we were doing before, that the veterinarian had autonomy to make those decisions, that we had to have the client-patient relationship with that vet. And the only thing that they didn't put in there that we wanted was 918-5. They did not allow import. So technically, because it doesn't specify that, you know, a shelter or rescue, I'm sort of confusing myself here. They can't transfer into the state. So we do a lot with the Kansas City, Kansas shelters, and those all along the southern border into Oklahoma. They go back and forth. So there are some rescues on our side, there are rescues on the other side, and now they can't send them in. Even if they have adopters who will adopt them on the Kansas side, they can't bring them in. So it really, while we were happy to get the transfer and adoption in state or out of state, we were disappointed with that action. Feline leukemia was not included. And that brought Senate Bill 117 in 2019. So basically that disease law that I showed you earlier, with a section that included dogs and cats, that's all it had in there for dogs and cats. This bill actually defined, had a whole section that had definitions, quarantine order, the requirements for reporting, transport, adoption, and it exempted veterinary clinics and shelters working under a veterinarian of record. So it had its own section, and then it deleted that 635, the section that included the cats and dogs. So the issues were intense. We weren't engaged ahead of time. So the bill came from another group. We didn't find out till, I want to say it was 5 days before the hearing. It might have been less. Information was not sent out to all the advocates until, you know, I found out. So we were struggling. We didn't have a message that we could get out quickly. We were struggling just to have a look it over and get testimony. The other issue was that rescues were not included, and that created a problem. Rescues had been under shelters prior, but under the regulations for 2018, they were separated out. So I don't think it was the intent to exclude rescues. I think at the time they were considered under shelters. And then in 2018, we had a law, an update to the Pet Animal Act that separated them. But that caused a lot of issues. Rescues came out, some of them came out against it for that reason, or they wanted amendments for that reason. One of the other issues was the group that brought the bill had worked really hard with the Kansas Department of Agriculture and the Kansas Livestock Association. They were in the past adamantly opposed to opening this law up and having any changes because they are fearful that national groups are going to take away their livestock, even though cats and dogs have nothing to do with livestock. So during the hearing, they actually testified against it. So after all of that work that the other group did and all the testimony and everything, it failed to get worked and passed out of committee. So it died there. We did take additional actions. We had multiple requests to the Governor's Pet Animal Board. Again, every time I went, I mentioned it. I continued to mention, well, this time it was feline leukemia positive cats. And actually the disease law itself, we wanted changes. The disease law affects everything. So a cat with ringworm, a dog with, you know, who's getting over kennel cough, it affects all of them. So it wasn't just the feline leukemia positive cats. We made multiple requests to the Secretary of Agriculture and the Animal Health Commissioner, requests to legislators, the heads of the chairs of committee, the heads of both houses. And then we began conversation with the governor's office. And the governor's office has been incredibly supportive of changes for the Pet Animal Act. It's over, 32 years old. It's time to update it. When it was put into effect, it was barely any rules, and it followed the USDA guidelines at the time. So imagine the changes you've seen in the last 32 years and how different things are, particularly for animals, and we are still using that same law. So advocates, we've been in talks, and we've had Zoom meetings and been working on different issues of how we can go forward and get this passed. We're working on a sign-on letter with all the shelters and rescues, and we're requesting a regulation change in the Pet Animal Act for the adoption or transfer of cats that test positive for feline leukemia retrovirus. The letter is going to be sent to the governor's office. They know it's coming. We've already had conversations. We'll send it again to the Secretary of Ag and the Kansas Animal Health Commissioner. But this time we're going to have each shelter and rescue contact their legislators. We're going to have them send the letter first, then we're going to have them contact and ask for a meeting. They're going to ask at that time for help passing that legislation or making changes to the regulations. So either one of those, either through statute or through pressure on the Department of Agriculture to allow those changes in regulations. So I'm very hopeful. I think this will be a big difference in getting people engaged, particularly with the shelters. We have the directors of the shelter and the board president of that shelter for whatever district they're in, contact their legislators. And then we have the shelter itself, again, the director or the board president send to all legislators in that county, because that shelter or rescue usually supports the entire county. So we think it's going to make a big difference. With COVID, it's talk about burning your eyes out on Zoom meetings. It's been tough. And unfortunately, when you're on a call, you have other things at your disposal. So you can look at your phone, you can answer messages, you can do all sorts of things while you're also paying attention. So we're not really paying attention and getting focused in. So I'm very, very hopeful that I'll be back on the road in October. I'm going to use the whole month to visit at least 100 shelters and rescues, and give them messaging, have good conversations. I can even meet with the legislators with them when we're there. And during that time, I will also outline the changes for the Kansas Pet Animal Act, which will include that adoption and transfer of feline leukemia positive cats. We do have supporting organizations already. The Animal Control Association, Stray Dog Policy, Western Kansas Animal Alliance, Wichita Animal Action League, KCK Animal Coalition, lots of shelters and rescues. We have 3 members so far on the Governor's Pet Animal Board that have said, yes, we'll support this, which is huge. We've not had that before. We had the 1. Now we have 2 that are representing other entities, not just shelters and rescues. So it's really exciting. And then of course we have out-of-state organizations. With the good comes the bad. We do have opposition from the Department of Agriculture. The KVMA has repeatedly gone against any animal welfare bill that the Department of Ag doesn't like. So they opposed everything so far. We made greyhounds dogs. Before that, you could, burn them alive and it wasn't a crime. We banned carbon monoxide changes, they were against that. We updated the Kansas Pet Animal Act, they were against that. We had a hot car bill, they were against that. If the Department of Ag is against it, then the KVMA is going to be against it, and the same with the Kansas Livestock Association. We do have in-state animal welfare groups that are opposed to this. They don't believe that these cats should be allowed to be adopted. To me, that's an educational opportunity. And hopefully I'll be reaching out to Dr. Levy and Monica about that. The AKC and breed groups are also going to be opposing these issues, and probably more out of state particularly. So our next steps, again, having those handouts and messaging, getting testimony ready, doing that follow-up, media, letters to the editor, op-eds, social media posts, action alerts, really important whenever an issue is starting to move or just before a hearing or before a vote. You want to really get everybody to use their voice, send an email, do whatever it takes to get attention on that. This is my friend's cat in the sink, by the way, and they're adorable. And then you want to call and email your legislators and be sure to engage others. With legislators, I always think that a quick call is the most effective way to do it. And you don't always get to talk to your legislator. You talk to their assistant, who is the backbone of the legislature. They know everything. They do everything. So they are just as good as talking to your legislator. They're busy. They don't, your legislator's busy. They get thousands of calls and emails during the session. So I always like scheduling in-person meetings while they're in district. So for Kansas, our legislature is out. You know, they're having special hearings here and there, but basically the legislature is done for the year. And it's a great time to not only get a hold of them while they're at home and take them out for coffee and have a good conversation, but they also hold in-district public meetings. And this, again, for me, I think for people is an educational opportunity. They know when they see me there, the questions about animal welfare are coming. And that's great. They're going to answer them and they'll say, well, I'll get with you later, or whatever they're going to say. But the better issue is I've got a room full of people who knows nothing about the question I'm going to ask. And I am now able to educate those people that there's an issue there. So again, going to those meetings and talking about these issues will help you get your voice out there and get others to do the same. So particularly with feline leukemia positive cats. You know, it's easy to give up. I've been doing this a long time. I'm in my 60s, so it's been over 30 years. And that didn't include, you know, volunteering as a kid at the Helping Hands Humane Society in Topeka. I hate the word compromise, and I tell you what, over the last, I don't know, 15 years or so, I have come to appreciate that word. If you are going to compromise, it means you've just made a first step. If you don't get what you want, that's just not getting it, and it's a loss. But if you compromise, you have made a step. So I have come to really appreciate that word and what it means. And every bill we have, everything we do, I look for a compromise so that I can be ready if that presents itself. After a disappointment, we regroup, we work towards the next legislation. The good thing here is I have, 6 months of being able to work on the issues that'll come up in January again. I also suggest that you meet with groups and advocates that not only did not participate to help educate them and get them involved, but meet with those who maybe were opposition. Not all of them, but some of them. Give them updated information and hopefully do some education in getting it passed. you know, 9 years for felony animal cruelty in Kansas, 4 years for cockfighting. I fought 11 years because they want to bring back greyhound racing. And it took 7 years for FIV adoption. I can tell you that you can't give up, that every step you take forward is positive. And we're going to get this passed. I feel it. I feel it'll be either 2022 or in 2022. We're not gonna give up, and we're not gonna back down. So with that, I feel like I've been talking incessantly. Do you guys have any questions?
Great presentation, Midge, and feel free to turn your camera on if you'd like to.
Oh, okay, sure. This is Cooper.
We do. That is Cooper. Cooper is very handsome. We do have questions, and I'm trying to find where I wrote my questions down. Oh, my various pieces of paper here. Okay, so what can those of us who are not in Kansas do to help the situation?
I think if you know people in Kansas, you can certainly contact them and give them information on the issue. I'm going to reach out to specific people for help with the Department of Ag. I gave them Dr. Levy's information when I sent them the info. I think sharing posts, social media posts, is also critical. Even if you don't live here, you're going to hit other people who do. So make sure you share those posts. Anytime you see that, that would be incredibly helpful.
In terms of the opposition, you know, what's sort of their platform that they're giving for going against this?
I can tell you the Department of Ag thinks that they're diseased beyond adoptability, and they think it's a spreader. So that's why I gave them all the updated information that was released. I think Margaret Tompkins sent it to me, and then gave them Dr. Levy's information, hoping they would contact her. So when that didn't happen, I sent it to them again and asked again if they would do that. That's the Department of Agriculture. With the, I actually have a couple of cat organizations and a couple of rescues and a shelter that are opposed because they too think that it will cause disease and be a spreader. You know, I've sent them the information. I've talked to them, so it's an educational opportunity. I am going to give some of them some, I might give Monica some information to give them a call, because it sounds like she's really good at that.
So I'm actually trying to think about, so, you know, organizations here in New England who have been adopting out feline leukemia positive cats, FIV cats, for quite a long time. And we kind of were wondering, you know, sort of what's our next role in this world when transports start drying up and whatever. But, you know, is there a role for us to maybe contact those cat groups to share with them, you know, how things have changed over the last 20 years for us in New England?
Absolutely. I think getting, if they've kept statistical information, I think that would be really helpful in showing them, look, that's inaccurate. We've done it. We've been doing it for years. Here's our proof and evidence. I think anytime you can do that, that's going to be very helpful.
Yeah, I mean, I would especially say, I think that'd be more impactful, like cat to cat,
Yep.
sort of cat to cat group versus like municipal shelter to maybe small rescue cat group. Might have a different feel to it than if it's like, we're a grassroots organization over here, you know, we know what sort of challenges you may be feeling and going through and whatever, and the information and pushback too. I mean, there's a lot of nervousness. I mean, we had a veterinarian once that was doing rounds in our facility, and we kind of just, you know, we basically, when we had our FIV room, we just sort of opened the door and let them out and just said, let's be free, and go out into the main room, because we have it's a ranch house. And they, you know, the vet that did rounds at that time, he was like, at first he was like, oh, this is terrible. This is horrible. This is awful. And this was FIV. So, this was a long time ago. And then we're like, well, let's just kind of do this for a while and see what happens. And everybody was cool. So
I think that's a great way to do it. When you said rescue, cat rescue, because I don't know about you guys, but Kansas is like this when it comes to shelters and rescues. There's a lot of infighting and a lot of we're doing better than you are. And so it's, in particular, if one is supporting something, we'll have one not support something. So I don't think that's the case here, but I do think having like groups getting together and talking about the issue would be very helpful.
what do legislators say when you pose to them the fact that Kansas is the only state that won't adopt out feline leukemia positive cats? Is that a surprising thing to them, or?
Yeah, I don't think they understand it. That's the first part, because they didn't understand FIV, and we were trying to explain that, and that's where our message got a little convoluted in the beginning. And so we have to be really careful. They're not going to take the time to understand that. The majority of them are just not going to do that. We have some that are, cat lovers, and they're going to want to learn about it, and they have, and then they go forward. I think what I hear a lot is, what does the Department of Ag want to do? What does the Animal Health Commissioner want to do? They're the bottom line for Kansas as far as disease control. And like I said, billions of dollars in livestock. And so the message we convey is they're not livestock. These are not live. These are animals in your home. They're with your kids. They are not livestock. They're not a food product. So we have to hit that a lot. And then, we have HSVMA that helps us. We have an in-state, a few vets in state that help us, shelter vets. So I think that's the other issue, is veterinarians are gods here. If we have a case and we're in court, they're going to listen to them. If we're at the legislature and we're testifying and there's a vet there, they're going to listen to that veterinarian. So we have to find a way to get them more engaged in the process here.
It's really interesting, because I know in other states we've had issues around cats being, or feral cats. Are they considered wildlife, or are they, considered domestic? How do you treat them as domestic animals versus wildlife, and all that kind of stuff? So it's like this, we've got these categories floating around with regards to cats, and nobody knows where to put them.
Well, in Kansas is still very backward on TNR and feral cats versus community cats. And if you leave the cat outside, even though it's spayed and neutered, and you don't have somebody to care for it, then you're abandoning it and breaking the state statute on animal cruelty. So you could divide our state in half. The eastern half, much more updated, the western half, not. And so when you look at simple issues like TNR, and we're not getting that, it's really hard to move forward on an issue like feline leukemia positive cats.
What about affordable spay-neuter services and access to care? Are there certain areas of the state where you have what we call like spay-neuter deserts or anything like that?
Most of the state is a spay-neuter desert. We have areas of the state, the poorest area of the state is Southeast Kansas. It's populated, but it's also very, very poor. And they're having trouble even finding a vet. I have a shelter, one of the biggest shelters there has a clinic, set up a beautiful clinic, and cannot find a vet to hire for that area. So it's multiple problems. And then you have veterinarians in the smaller communities that will charge, $200, $300 for a dog spay. And they're not going to lower it. If you say, well, we'd like to bring someone in once a month who has a van, then they threaten to badmouth you because you're taking money out of their pocket. So it's been a real, Kansas has a lot of issues. They're not alone. I think a lot of the Midwestern states have those issues. They're just starting to move forward. Northeast Kansas, very good. Wichita, really getting there, but the rest of the state, Topeka, would be the other one that's doing very well. But the rest of the state, they're struggling with all those issues.
So many of these issues, it's so hard for me not to get up on my soapbox, which is I feel that until we can get this access to care, access to affordable spay neuter, and obviously there's multi-factors in there: money, vets, technicians, you know, human capacity, all that stuff. So I'm not going to go into all those issues. We'll save that for the United Spay Alliance conference in February. However, I feel like our hands are tied for so many areas of growth without having that spay neuter capacity available.
With that, I agree. We, you know, we just had a group in Topeka that is just getting started, that is going to work on spay neuter, TNR, access to care for the entire, I think there was, I don't know, 28 counties in their region. That's what they're going to start with. And they're hoping in the next few years to be able to expand to the southeast portion and then eventually the entire state. It's very exciting. If they're able to do that, it'll be very, very exciting.
Excellent. That's great. At the United Spay Alliance, we have volunteer researchers now that are doing research on every state in the United States to make sure that we have all the information about the larger programs, the smaller programs, the clinics, everything, sort of trying to get everything on multiple levels. And so hopefully, you know, we'll be able to help assist from a umbrella side of things, also from the United Spay Alliance and that side of things. Let me just scan here in, person has been saying, oh, Iowa's had a challenging situation also. TNR has been an issue in parts of Iowa. It's impossible to get city codes changed to allow for TNR. Person is moving to a town that is better with TNR. So I guess.
And that's like that, as bad as it is in Iowa and Kansas, live in Missouri. That's a tougher one. You know, they're all Nebraska, South Dakota, North Dakota, Arkansas. You know, there are issues like that throughout the Midwest.
Excellent. Okay. Actually, we have another person suggesting Dr. Jeff out in Colorado to have him come and do some spay neuter surgery days. So it's he goes down to Mexico and does the quick spay clinics.
Oh yeah,
Jeff Young.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So well, actually, you know what I wrote down, and I'm not familiar with this organization. Others may very well be, but there's Vets Without Borders. You know, so it's like, you know, all the traveling out to do your spay neuter initiatives. I think we need to start looking internally for these rural areas. I certainly know Oklahoma's having problems hiring vets in the rural areas, and obviously there's been a lot of spay neuter initiatives out in reservations and that kind of thing. But I think there's even more where we're going to have to kind of do some traveling in for like these MASH style events as a Band-Aid to help get us through until we can build out some more capacity to a certain degree. And like I said, there's a lot of multi-factors in that whole issue of basically growing our spay neuter capacity, whether it's, you know, changing how our clinics are run, changing what our technicians can do, what our veterinarians can do, you know, expanding to like a nurse practitioner model or something like that. Obviously, there's
changing, you know,
veterinary school and all that kind of stuff too. Yeah.
Things are changing, and I think I hear it a lot from people, maybe with a little burnout, you know, I'm so tired of fighting, I'm so tired of doing that, nothing changes. I get goosebumps when I talk about it because I've been around long enough that I've seen it, you know, and I wish they could see it. I always tell people to raise their right hand and repeat after me, you're doing a good job. So I think they just need to look at the changes that have happened and just keep going forward. And we're going to get there.
Yep, I agree with you 100% with regards to that. And I appreciate your presentation. I'm just looking to see, I don't think, Yeah, people are, so now I got everybody riled up. They're all talking about the fact they can't get spay neuter appointments and all that stuff. And I'm sorry.
Always happens with spay neuter. That's same issues here. Same issues here. Can't get the cats, get them done. Yep.
I let the genie out of the bottle, so I am sorry on that one. But Midge, thank you so much. This was a fantastic presentation.